Welcome back to the I Drink From Skulls podcast. It's your host, Matt Smith. With me today, we have a very special guest. He's the immortal from Ipswich, the legend from Limestone Park. He's a family man. He's the founder of Botcher Estate Agents, Mr. Adam Botcher. How are you, sir?
Good, mate. How you doing? Long time no talk.
Glad to have you on the show, my good man. Did you like that build-up?
Glad to be here. Yeah, it's way more than I'm used to. So
I'm a marketer. That's what we do.
Yeah, keep it up. Can you keep that intensity up for the whole program?
I'll do my best.
Let's go. I drink from skulls. Drink from the skulls of my enemies.
So, mate, you're the very first Aussie I've had on the show.
Right.
So, with that in mind, who the hell is Adam Botcher?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm a real estate agent stroke principal. So I run an agency in Ipswich, Greater Springfield. For those overseas or not in the know, that's about 25, 30 kilometres west of Brisbane. So one of our major cities here in Australia. I'm a father, so I have two boys. I'm married with a wife, obviously. Yeah, you and I went to school together, so I'm a local through and through. So Ipswich is where our business is. It's where I grew up. It's where I played sport, and it's where I am now residing as a business owner.
Awesome, mate. And how long have you been in business?
So I've been doing real estate for about 15 years, but as a business owner, we're into our third year now.
How have you found it?
Look, there's a big difference between being a real estate agent and being a real estate principal or director. So there's obviously the leadership component. We've got 13 people here now in the business. So you're not just looking after yourself, you're looking after a large array of different personalities and different people. So that comes with its own challenges, but it's been rewarding and the business is doing really well. So better than we expected.
That's fantastic, mate. When you got started, was it just yourself or did you have a core team?
No, so when I finished up at my previous agency, I had no real plan of attack. I knew that I was going to go out and start my own agency, but I hadn't really put the blueprint together, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone that's thinking of going out on their own. I'd usually plan these things out in advance. Don't just try and wing it. But I was very lucky. After I left, I was working from my bedroom, sort of working remotely. But I was very lucky. Within the space of about 3 months, we had a number of agents join the agency. And from there, we just got a bigger space. And then once we outgrew that, we've upsized again. So I was lucky to have those guys follow me across. And yeah, we were able to build a team from 2 or 3 core agents.
That's fantastic. I know this will help a lot of people that will be listening or subscribe in the future. But was there a defining moment where you knew, you know what, I just got to do this thing for myself? Or talk us through that.
I think you reach a stage in your career where you can become comfortable where you are and you can become complacent, and that's okay for a lot of people. A lot of people stay in the same job at the same company for 15, 20, 30 years. But for people that maybe have the ambition to go out on their own, I think you just get to that point where you know you've reached a certain level of competency, so you know that you're able to do the job. It's just a matter of pulling the trigger and having the belief that, you know, if you go out there and give it 100% and do what you know you're capable of, you're very unlikely to fail. I think a lot of people are scared of failure, but I think, you know, if you're confident in your field and you've got that self-belief, you're going to make it. And I just reached that point where I'd been at the same place for a long time. I'd plateaued, the enthusiasm was gone. I just needed a different challenge. I knew that if I put my shoulder to the wheel, I could get it done, and that was a catalyst for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great share. It's also really cool, mate, to see, like, in 3 years, our business has been going 3.5 years, just the impact you can have in it's a pretty short amount of time. Like, if you think about the team you've built, you've got a team of 14, possibly expanding in the future, no doubt, and the number of lives you've impacted by the homes you've sold and getting people into their dream home and things like that. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. Even though it feels like it's a lot longer, 3 years isn't a long time, or 2.5. Yeah, coming into 3 years isn't a long time in reality, but you know, it's a 6-7 day a week investment in time. You make a lot of sacrifices away from your family. As you're aware, you sort of forgo different things so you can focus and put your energy into the business. But I think if you do that, you can have success relatively quickly. If you're willing to make those sacrifices.
Yeah, right. What have you been able to find? Balance isn't the right word, but like sort of like a counterbalance where you still see the family and you're still able to do things. I see what you share online, so I know it's not all work.
Yeah, look, Christmas is a non-negotiable for me. So anything over that sort of Christmas, New Year's period, Easter is another non-negotiable. I've been really, really bad at balancing work life. Even when I was an agent working at another agency, I would sort of always lean towards work and I would struggle to find that balance. But I think over the last 12 to 18 months, I've become more cognizant of the fact that my kids are only going to be a certain age for now, and they're going to be older before I know it. So I have made an effort to try and spend more time at home. I tried not to work Sundays unless there's something pressing, a deal to be done or a podcast. But for them, no, it's all good. For the most part, Sundays I try and have off. I work long hours during the week, so I'm in the office by 7:30, and I'm usually leaving at 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I try and at least have one full day a week at home. Saturday's a big day in real estate, so obviously it's hard, but it's the sacrifices you make early on. You're banking on those making or paying dividends down the track, so you get to spend some more time with the kids over the coming years.
That's right. In your case, you've put in and you're receiving the rewards out of that, which I think some people skip over. They might see all the success. They see that financially you're doing really well, or they think most business owners are, but they don't see the other side of it. Is that fair enough?
I think that's a very fair assumption, and there's been a lot of people in the 14, 15 years that I've been in real estate leave to start their own companies without the benefit of seeing what goes on the other side. And look, the attrition rate for people going out on their own is really, really high. I mean, most people don't make it, and the reality is that's because they only see what's on Instagram. They don't see the director sitting in the office at 7:30 at night, trying to reconcile accounts and put out fires and do all those sort of things. So I think, we've got social media to thank for that. I think people try and present their lives or their businesses in a certain manner, but it's not really a true reflection of what goes on behind the scenes.
And that's so important to talk about. Social media is a highlight reel, and that highlight reel realistically is on steroids for most people. It's not their reality.
It's 100% on steroids. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think, and the more people posture on social media generally, when you dig a little bit deeper, there's not much behind that. There's very little substance. We're on social media. We use it as an advertising tool, but you won't see one of our agents flashing their new Range Rover or their Rolex on social media, because to me that's just, it's I don't think people want to see it. I don't think it holds any value. I think we try and provide some value with what we provide on social media, whether it's market updates or, information pertaining to the local market. I think that's far more important. It's a great tool for that, but, not necessarily the bling side of things. It's something the real estate industry is unfortunately well known for, and hopefully we can help phase it out.
I love that. Sort of taking a fight to the man. Love that, Botch.
Yeah. Is it do people care what car you drive or what watch you wear? Like, it blows me away. I think it's an insecurity thing, but I think it's a big turnoff, particularly in our demographic where, this isn't Double Bay or Toorak. This is western suburbs of Brisbane, Ipswich. You grew up here. It's still fairly working class. It's blue collar. People don't care about that type of stuff. Like, they want value, and we try and provide value as much as we can.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great share for anyone who's following along. Know your market, know your demographic, and be about it, hey?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I know agents in this once upon a time, obviously prices have gone north pretty drastically here, but there was a period of time where some agents were turning up to houses to do appraisals. Their cars were worth more than the houses. Right. And I think, are you really associating with your demographic there? But
no, I love that, mate. Just on that, we keep hearing, like if anyone watches the news, we keep hearing that the world, the financial markets, the real estate markets are the doom and gloom. They're going to collapse at some point. What are you seeing in the real estate market in Southeast Queensland?
Look, we're seeing really, really strong numbers at open home. So what are we, sort of 4 weeks into 2023 at the time of the podcast? And look, each weekend our open home numbers have been really, really strong. Properties are still selling. I think the worst of it's, I think we've passed the worst of it. I think it's probably, going to stay the way that it is now for a little while longer. And I think if it does, I think it's a pretty evenly spread market. It doesn't necessarily favour the sellers and it doesn't necessarily favour the buyers. It's there's good opportunities out there if you're a seller with the right house. It's presented well in a good location. We're still seeing huge turnouts. But on the flip side, there's less competition amongst buyers. In 2021, we might conduct an open home and have 25 people through, and by the end of the day, we'd have 10 or 15 offers. So there was that much competition. Where we're seeing those type of numbers through open homes still, we may be dealing with 4 or 5 offers. So there's less competition if you're a buyer, but there's still, some good opportunities if you're a seller as well. So I don't believe the doom and gloom, mate. I don't, house prices dropping by 40%, things like that. I don't buy into that. I've been through a couple of cycles now, and I think we're past the worst of what we've experienced. I think where we are now is where we'll probably stay for a little while.
What's the biggest challenge you see, like with your clients specifically?
The biggest challenges, I guess, for sellers is recognizing that, it isn't 2021. So 2 years ago, the price that they have in mind or the price that they would like to achieve may have been achievable, but because we do have less competition, it's just getting sellers to recognize that perhaps, there may need to be some thought adjustment around where the property actually sits. The challenge for buyers is serviceability with interest rate rises. Every time that happens, your potential as a buyer to borrow money, obviously that decreases and it affects your ability to borrow a certain amount. So it depends what side of the coin you sit on, but for sellers, it's adjusting to the new market. And for buyers, it's, trying to get in before we see some more interest rate rises, and potentially people's ability to borrow a certain amount will decrease as that occurs. We've had an interest rate rise as late as, I think it was on the 8th of February. So that's going to impact people. So they're the two main challenges that we're seeing at the moment.
Mate, we just had the interest rate rise on the 8th, as you mentioned. All the news, all the mail is suggesting there could be 2 or 3 more. Is that sort of...
Yeah.
I think that's probably fair enough and factored in.
I think from... And look, I'm an agent, not a property analysis, but from all the feedback that we've had and all the people that we talk to that would have a better understanding of that type of thing, I think that's probably a fair assumption. And I think when I say we're past the worst of it, I think people have probably recognise that, and if they're working with a broker, that's probably been factored into their borrowing capacity and things like that. So buyers can still buy with confidence.
It's an interesting one, and I want to dig in here a little bit further. Despite the challenges or interest rates going up, realistically going back to normal, been at record lows for so long, but rental occupancy is at record lows, which means demand is higher than Snoop Dogg at a Willie Nelson concert. Is that right? I
think that's a fair assumption. Yeah, I mean, probably not the analogy I'd use with landlords or tenants, but look, demand for good quality rentals is it's through the roof, and I think that goes beyond. I think that's actually a state or even federal issue. I think there is a lack of affordable housing across the board, and we're really, really seeing it stretched at the moment where our property managers might be dealing with 20 applications, 20 good applications, 20 people that on paper deserve to be, put in a rental property, but unfortunately you can only pick one, and we just don't have the volume of homes available. So I think it's a real problem. I think it needs to be addressed on a higher state level or federal level. I don't see how that's going to be resolved short term.
It's a tough one. There's always a winner and there's normally always a loser in these types of things, or we always hope for a win-win. But does that sort of sense, is there a sense that there's an opportunity for investors there? If they can get in now, people need homes, they need somewhere to live, they can get in and they can service the repayments and get a renter. Is that a good opportunity for them with higher interest rates?
I think so. I think, particularly in our area where they're going to be less affected by those interest rate rises because their serviceability is a lot lower. And the rent, has increased dramatically. I think there are some good opportunities out there, but we've seen that, interestingly enough, you bring up that point, and you would think that that's a space where you would be seeing people take advantage of that, but we're not really seeing that. It seems to be more so the owner-occupied properties that are still selling within a relatively short period of time. The investment space in terms of selling and trying to find buyers has actually been the part of the business that's probably slowed down the most. Yeah. And I think, a lot of that comes down to the fact that because prices have gone up so much, perhaps Ipswich doesn't represent the same return. Now, once upon a time, you'd get 6 or 7% on your return. You're only getting sort of 4 or 5 now. So maybe it's not as appealing as it once was in that regard. But yeah, it's very unpredictable, and it's an interesting sort of period of time we're in, that's for sure.
It's funny though, if just digging in a bit further, it's might not be as appealing right now, but the properties are affordable, and if you could get in now and get a better interest rate in a couple of years, rents don't really go down too much, do they? Could be.
No, not when there's a supply issue. They certainly don't. Yeah, look, it's interesting, but again, that comes down to the fact that people willing to play the long game, or do they want the short term? I think we're sort of not brainwashed, but we're sort of trained to think that everything's a short term game now. We shares and crypto and all that type of stuff, where property is a long term game. The property market doesn't sort of work in a linear fashion. It goes up and down, and you've got to be prepared to play the long game and wait 5, 10, 15 years before you see it significant return. So I think with all those other platforms out there, property, for whatever reason, maybe on the back burner for the time being. I'm not too sure.
Never underestimate the silliness of humans, because people need somewhere to live, and a house is as good as it gets in Australia.
100%. But I think it's just people aren't willing to play that long game. Yeah, they want their return, straight away, and all within a period of months, not years. But I think you're spot on. I think, it makes sense, particularly out this way. It makes sense if you want to play the long game. We have the Olympics coming up soon, and that's going to bring a whole lot of infrastructure and jobs and whatnot. So there's worse places to invest.
Yeah. Just on a different note, I've seen you promoting, just, posting and stuff like that you're able to help people find a home to rent, or you're helping the owner-occupier rent it out. Talk us through that.
In terms of helping owners find a tenant, it's the same as trying to sell a property that might be overpriced. It's the same concept. Sometimes landlords just want too much, and despite the demand that we're talking about, if something's grossly overinflated, there won't be anyone there to buy it or rent it. So, sometimes it's just a matter of our property managers having a discussion with the owners and trying to get, them to see that perhaps, they are slightly above where the market sits. And I think that's something that 99% of agencies, particularly in the property management side of the business, they don't do that. They sort of let properties sit on the market and they wait, where our property managers are very proactive. If something's not renting within, a reasonable period of time, they're on the front foot having conversations with their landlords, trying to get, perhaps a slightly lower rental price per week, or whether we offer the tenants 3 free months, whatever we need to do. In those situations, you need to be proactive, and that's something that on both sides of the coin, sales and rentals, we don't sit back and wait for things to happen, because properties don't rent or they don't sell by luck. Sometimes you actually have to use some strategy and be proactive to get things done. And I think you've seen a lot of people that entered the industry in 2021, 2020, that, properties were selling themselves, or renting themselves. You're literally an order taker. Whereas the market shifted a little bit now, where you actually have to come up with a marketing plan. You need to have frank conversations with your owners, with your landlords. You need to be proactive. If something's not happening, you need to try something different. And that's one thing I think we do better than most agencies, is we're proactive, and that's how we get things rented that other property managers can't get rented. And we sell things that other agents have had a go at selling, and they've been sitting on the market for 100, 200 days, and we're able to sell them within a couple of weeks. And that comes down to marketing. And I know you know a lot about marketing, that's your background, but a good marketing strategy can deliver results in a short window of time.
Yeah, I'd love to dig in a bit further there, because it's when I read, and I've seen it, I don't know, at least a dozen times, and I'm sure it's happened a lot more than that, but at least a dozen that I've seen, where you've taken on a property that hasn't sold, and this is like last year as well, where things, like you said, were selling themselves, but you've taken on a property, it's been sitting there for 3, 6, sometimes even 12 months, or 6 months, and you guys have taken it on and been able to get a great deal for all parties in a couple of weeks. Is that what you put that sort of success down to, like having a definitive plan and a strategy in place?
Well, I think so. I think in the ideal world, we'd like to get the listing the first time around, but the reality is you don't win every listing. It's a competitive industry, but what happens is agent lists property, they're enthusiastic for 2 or 3 weeks. They generally have given the owner some sort of price expectation at the appraisal that was unrealistic to begin with. So they go to market at that price point. It sits on the market for 2 or 3 weeks. The sellers go, what the hell is happening? You told us we'd get this. We've had no feedback. We've had, maybe 3 or 4 groups through over 3 or 4 weeks. What's happening? The agent loses enthusiasm. The property ends up sitting there for 90 days, which is the maximum amount of time you can list a property for in Queensland. And then somebody like us will come in and actually deliver a proactive strategy, whether that's an auction, whether that's an expression of interest campaign, and we'll overservice our client for 2 or 3 weeks, because a lot of the time it comes down to vendor education. So if they've been told by H&A their property's worth $800,000, but the comparables are showing $700,000, $650,000, then they need evidence from the market to support that. They're not going to take the agent's word for it. They need market feedback. So we'll design a marketing campaign that attracts people to the property. We'll get that buyer feedback. We'll pass that on to the vendors, and then they'll be able to make a decision based on the feedback from the market, whether they retain ownership of the property or they accept where true market value is and they sell the home.
Gotcha.
So it's communication. It's not over-promising when you sit down initially with the seller and giving them false expectations around price, and it's about feedback. Like I said, it's very easy for agents to lose enthusiasm if they haven't sold a property in 2 or 3 weeks, and I think that's a byproduct of the last 3 years where things have sold so quickly. If I wind the clock back 5-10 years, I'd sit at open homes. I remember in 2011, just after we had floods here in Ipswich, and the market, to say it was bad would be an understatement. I mean, you couldn't give property away. And I'd sit at the same property for 8 weeks in a row, and we might see 3 people.
Wow.
But I always kept in contact with my sellers. I always kept them up to date, even if there was nothing to keep them up to date on. And I think learning how to communicate is the key. And I think that's where a lot of agents drop the ball if they haven't sold it in 2 or 3 weeks.
Gotcha.
they forget the seller's name,
Yeah.
and they become really easy targets for companies like us. And we take over the listing, and though we could literally, provide 100+ case studies of properties that we've sold within a couple of weeks that have been on the market for 6 to 12 months prior.
Wow.
And I think that's one of where, that comes down to training, always trying to learn. There's people within the industry, with outside the industry, that, YouTube's a great source. And we do a lot of training internally with our agents around that processing of stock, vendor communication. Don't sugarcoat things. It's, in my opinion, I think sales is moved past that. I think buyers and sellers want transparency. Like 2023, everything's available on the internet. Buyers come to open homes, or the sellers, when we go to sit down to do an appraisal, they know more about the market than most of the agents do, because the information's there on the internet. It's not hard to find. So, be transparent, communicate frequently, and provide the truth, and don't be afraid to ask hard questions. And it's amazing what happens.
Yeah. What's, let's say, just hypothetically, let's say I'm looking to list, I want to sell my place. What can I do, and what could any homeowner do to avoid that happening to them, where, like, as in, someone's coming in, they're promising them a crazy high price just to get the listing. How can they avoid that? Like, what would you do?
So there's usually, if I'm a seller, there's usually 3 or 4 reasons why the property doesn't sell. So it's price, is usually the big one. Presentation, your marketing strategy's inadequate, or you've picked the wrong agent. So if you get the presentation right, and not every house needs to look like it's in Toorak or Double Bay. I mean, we're in Ipswich. This is our market, but have some pride in your house, present it well, declutter. So the presentation's important. Then coming up with a marketing strategy, work out, is this going to be something that an investor's going to buy? Is this going to be something that is going to appeal to a first home buyer, or somebody that, is looking for a renovation project? So work out what your target demographic is. And then once you get those things sort of down pat with your agent, you need to come up, with a realistic price that you're going to go to market at. Use comparable sales, or take the property to auction. That's another great way to sell without a price. And generally, if you do those 2 or 3 things, that you really give yourself a good opportunity to sell. It's when you get one of those things wrong, so price, presentation, marketing, and the agent that you decide to go with, if you get one of those 4 things wrong, your chances of selling decrease. So they're the big 4 things, and a good, competent agent should be able to walk into the house and come up with a marketing strategy that's going to deliver competitive tension, create buyer competition, all that kind of stuff. And that's probably the most important thing.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What would you do to further investigate an agent if you were in that late listing stage?
Yeah, if a seller is on the fence whether they're going to go with us or they're going to go with somebody else, I'll give them, or offer to give them, the number of the last 5 clients that we represented. Obviously with the permission of the previous clients, but I think referrals or reviews speak volumes.
Yeah.
So people that have had a good experience with you, that aren't a family member or a friend, that are giving sort of unbiased sort of feedback. I think that's a great way for a seller to dig a bit deeper. Ask for, can I grab, the details of somebody that you worked with over the last couple of months? And if the agent hesitates or doesn't want to provide that, then that probably haven't provided the best experience for an owner. So I think that's a good tip for sellers. Talk to people that have worked with the person you're thinking about engaging. And there's a lot of information online, Google reviews, things like that. But actually speaking with someone that's, worked with the agent for an extended period of time is pretty powerful. And a lot of our business, subsequently is very heavily referral based. A lot of it's word of mouth. We don't not tell our agents to cold call and prospect because it's important. But the reality is a lot of the inventory that we get, or the homes that we get to sell, do come from repeat clients or friends of previous clients, and that's a good way to get business.
It's the best, isn't it?
It's the best way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, mate. I want to change the tune a little bit here. I'm going to do a bit of word association. So just tell me the first thing that springs into your mind when I drop a few words on you? I'll start with real estate in Ipswich.
Ready to
I
boom.
like it. Ipswich itself.
Fantastic place to live.
Rugby league?
Injuries.
I can relate to that. Business.
Rewarding, but you need to be willing to sacrifice time and put in a lot of effort.
And lastly, Botchers estate agents.
The best in the
Oh,
West.
I like that.
Like that, I genuinely think that we've got the best agents in Ipswich and Greater Springfield, and I do think that.
Absolutely. Just basing it off of all the results and the happy people and your team, I would have to agree, mate. What's a question I should have asked you but didn't?
Look, I don't know. I mean, it's a hard one to answer. Look, I think you sort of got there towards the end, but I think it's really important when sellers do decide, and I'm getting, going back into sort of real estate mode here, but I think it is really important when sellers do decide to go to market that, they make the right decision the first time and they do their due diligence, because if they don't, for most people, it's their biggest asset. And the longer the property sits online, the less likely you are to achieve the price that you would have in the first couple of weeks. So if you put it in the hands of the wrong agent, you could be costing yourself a significant amount of money. So I think that was probably the most pertinent thing for me is, how do you identify best person representing in the market? And I'm glad you touched on that, because I think it's really important. And I think a lot of people that have been successful over the last sort of 12 to 18 months are going to have to really up their game in the next 12 to 18 months.
Absolutely. Mate, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you?
We're all over the internet. So if you search Botchers Estate Agents, obviously our website will come up there. We're located in the middle of Ipswich, 239 Brisbane Street in Ipswich, but www.botchers.com.au is the best place to go to. We're in the middle of upgrading our website and whatnot, so that's the best point of contact.
Mate, any final thoughts or words?
No, mate, no, thanks for having me on, and it's good to see that you're doing something like this, because I think a lot of people are afraid to get outside of their comfort zone and do things that don't necessarily come natural to most people, and it's a good thing that you're doing, and hopefully, people get something from it.
You've been dropping nuggets all day, my good man. We're very appreciative to have you sharing that gold with us today. First Aussie, definitely a future immortal of the real estate space. Mr. Adam Botcher, thank you very much, you bloody legend.
All right. Honoured to be the first Australian. Thank you.
Alrighty, and that's it from the I Drink From Skulls podcast today. Stay tuned for the next episode. Rah!